Yes.
So I like the first question because I was about to ask that one to myself. So there was but your response to that question actually brought a couple more questions. I guess the first question is: has anybody, I guess anyone who's done the less invasive way first, if they try to seek some financial compensation, and then I guess two scientific related questions was the second one. So the question is it possible then to see if we can actually then try to replicate the study in animal subjects? And then lastly is that since there are other versions of this question of do you want to try to actually investigate this with other types of surgeries, is it possible that these researchers, just in case they come up with the same result, to actually do the study in parallel of investigating the side effects and causes as well as looking at the statistics?
Yeah, so to your first question, and I think that also naturally draws from the point that, when I mentioned that there are doctors who say, I can't stop doing it, I gotta keep doing it, you might ask yourself, well, why? Why would a doctor say that? I mean, you have evidence, and there are multiple factors. One of them is that, for many years, surgeons have devoted a tremendous amount of time and effort on learning this approach. In other words, they have gone to other institutions, even to other countries, to learn how to do the laparoscopic approach, to learn how to do the robotics approach. When doing this approach, often this is sort of like a way of setting yourself aside from your colleagues within your department. It was always like, oh, it's that doctor that knows how to do it, and let's go to his operating room and look how beautiful he does this procedure. So there was also that sense of a little bit of a pride that, I'm separate from everybody else in my department, I'm better than everybody else in my department. So that's also an element of the pride, the element of I spend too much time and effort in devoting to learning this procedure. Then there's that element as well, as you mentioned, the element of the conflict of interest, that there are many surgeons who get paid to teach this approach, to make sure that obviously that this is disseminated. So, there's that principle as well that you're basically saying, you can't teach this anymore, you shouldn't teach this anymore, and therefore, obviously, there's an element of that conflict of interest. With regards to the laboratory studies, yes, I mean, ideally that would be great to explore as to why this might be the case. But that brings on another question, because you might say, well, yes, I get it. The recurrence rate is higher, the mortality rate is higher, but man, look at this. They have much better quality of life, or they have so much less complications. And results from this study, and now others, are looking at complication rates. And it's found that the complication rates are not really different from the open to the minimally invasive approach on how we do open surgery today. If you say, well, let's compare now to 10 years ago, open surgery 10 years ago was very different for this procedure. So the complication rates are the same. So now you're saying recurrence rates are higher, mortality is higher, complications are the same. Well, maybe quality of life. Maybe the patients are able to get back to their normal activities and get back to doing the things that they enjoyed. So maybe that's a reason why we should investigate as to let's keep doing this surgery. And one of the components of this study was also to prospectively randomize patients and also evaluate quality of life. And the quality of life is the same. So now you have the same quality of life, same complication rate, worse cancer-related outcomes. Why would you want to pursue this question? And not that I discourage it. Of course, I'm all for additional studies, and colleagues of mine that have said, well, maybe I should do another study. Certainly it would be very easy for me to say, no, I mean, I already found the answer, forget it. I encourage them, I said, do another study, that would be great. But I think it would be challenging to offer a patient a procedure where you say, your complication rate is going to be the same, your quality of life is going to be the same, but maybe you have a higher rate of recurrence or a higher rate of dying, which patient is going to say, yeah, I'll go for that.
Thank you so much for your honesty and being here. It's amazing. So one thing I wanted to ask you is, like, the women, their families, was there a lot of legal issues? I mean, were like people being sued, or were they just like stunned with finding this out, or what? So I have a two-part question about it.
Yeah, so with regards to the legal issue, certainly we haven't seen any. And part of that may be that anytime a patient consents to a clinical trial, they know that this is part of an experimental question, that we're trying to decide what is better. So certainly that's part of the informed consent. And again, I think that although certainly one can always, a patient can always sue, but I think in a court of law, having an informed consent on a patient who knew that this was a trial, particularly a trial where you get randomized to choice A or choice B, it really wouldn't stand, I think, much. But again, to your question, there hasn't been any issue of lawsuits. What the patients that participated in the study that were in the minimally invasive arm, what they were naturally concerned about, they said, well, when am I supposed to expect that the highest likelihood of recurrence is going to happen? Fortunately, the study had been so long that by the time they were inquiring, we could assure them that if you haven't recurred by now, most likely you're not. But also, in addition to that, the patients that were still within that time frame where this could be a potential possibility, their question was as to how you're going to check me differently to make sure that if it does come back, you're going to do something differently. And in our institution, what we did is we changed the approach of also how we were monitoring those patients that had that procedure. Obviously, now we don't perform it anymore, so our surveillance approach doesn't change for a routine patient that comes in today, because that patient would have it through the open approach.
Okay. So I myself had a minimally invasive, but I didn't have cancer.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that it was the best option for me and the doctor. I mean, it was amazing. Because the recovery rate, you're out that day, well, the next day.
The next day.
So when I have to be honest with you, so I'm part of the group and I'm doing advertising so people will come and hear this magnificent or see the video. And I had one lady approach me and say, well, I wonder why Dr. Ramirez is still known for minimally invasive surgery, because this was the findings of what you're telling me. And I'm a novice, so, it seems like, he might want to do something else. And I said, but he's amazing, he's a qualified surgeon, so let's find out, let me ask that question. So.
Sure. So, first to the point of the minimally invasive surgery and the approach, there's no question, certainly, that a minimally invasive approach may offer patients a much better recovery, depending on the type of surgery that they're having. When we talk about open surgery in the past, and Andrea showed a picture of a patient with an incision from here to here, that's not the type of surgery that we do today for open surgery for cervical cancer. So for cervical cancer, we typically do a low transverse incision, and also most programs now have integrated something called enhanced recovery after surgery. You might have heard of them as ERAS programs. And the ERAS programs are programs that now completely have changed the recovery of patients. So today, a patient in our institution, typically that undergoes an open radical hysterectomy, she's going home the next day. So it's not like the old days of like the 7 days in the hospital, bed bound. So it's a very different approach. Now, with regards to the question why you're still the chief of minimally invasive surgery, it's not that this study now all of a sudden completely eliminates minimally invasive surgery for all patients on everything. We've shown that there is a worse outcome for cervical cancer. For endometrial cancer, we don't have any data that supports that it is worse than open surgery. So therefore, for uterine cancer, patients in our institution, and I think most institutions around the world, are still offered the minimally invasive surgery. For benign disease, they're still offered minimally invasive surgery. But for cervical cancer, they're not. So one of the pathologists in my institution said, well, Pedro, now your title should be Director of Minimally Invasive Surgery, except for cervical cancer.
Thank you so much.
Thank you both for your presentation, and it's beautiful to see your friendship together and how that supports, your work and standing in front of these facts. My question has to do with also with the liability. I don't understand in the face of your data why a hospital would allow a surgeon to continue to do the minimally invasive surgery for the cervical cancer, because wouldn't the hospital be bringing on more liability to themselves? And, you know, it seemed like this, in the way you described it, the surgeon has no, you know, review board or something. So, I mean, besides an ethical issue or like the psychological issue, you said, what about the liability issue?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And when we, in our institution, when we found these results, and that was back in October of 2017, as a group, we are the largest gynecologic oncology department in the country. And as a group, all 23 gynecologic oncologists, we decided, we said we stopped doing the surgery. So, you know, certainly that's setting an example. MD Anderson obviously is a well-known institution, but that's not the case everywhere else. And I think that there are multiple factors. One of them is the factor that, you know, if a hospital went to the surgeon, typically these surgeons will say, I gotta keep doing it. Of course, you know, as you saw, there were many editorials that would assume things or misquote things. And then, you know, if you have a respectable surgeon, particularly a surgeon that's doing a lot of surgery, is very, you know, that's the surgeon that's directing the flow of progress in that institution. The hospital may say, well, what do you think? And they say, oh no, that Ramirez guy is crazy. You know, I believe that, you know, in my hands, you know, it's probably like the surgeons in that study were terrible surgeons, but look at me, I'm such a great surgeon. We'll keep doing it. That may happen for a while, until, as you said, more issues with potential liability may come up where they say stop. I think most institutions in the United States have moved towards the open approach. So, and I think also it's a matter of time. You know, there's a book called Ending Medical Reversal that talks about studies that completely defied what was believed before. And one of the things that they mention is that for a study to completely change practice across the board, for a study to come out and say, we got to stop what we were doing before, on average, it takes 10 years for that to get to becoming the standard. The fact that within a year, the National Comprehensive Cancer Network guidelines has already changed based on this study is quite remarkable, but on average, it takes about 10 years. What are your thoughts?
And you would be surprised also how very respectable surgeon and people that how they can start to say, like to rationalize and say, oh, but there is this problem, there is this little thing in the study that it was not taken into account, and so I don't believe the study. So even people that we respect a lot, etc., I've been surprised how they can take a position like this, and mostly sometimes people that have been invested a lot in this type of surgery. And so when there is more at stake, certainly people can become more attached to what they are doing, more attached to the ring. You know, there's ring is mine. That's to me. And but yes.
And I think it. You know, Andrea, if you want, I mean, if you could share with everyone, there, you know, he had someone who was a very respectable mentor during his early years in his academic life. And what did he say to you as it pertains to the cognitive dissonance?
No, that one of the worst thing that you can do is to say something during your career that contradicts something that you said before. And and again, very respectable people, so people that we respect a lot, but it's true that sometimes the ego, like the attachment to what we do comes really into play. So this is why it's important. For us it was a friendship, but even in science there is the peer review committee. So the more someone put things in front of other people, the more likely is that there is this feedback that it can be certainly a part of a friendship or even just professional. But again, I've been very surprised also, and every time I go and I go to a meeting where at this point Pedro is around, there is something going on in that room, and because again there is people has a lot at stake. You have invested like 10 or 20 years of your life to learn that technique, and so you have invested a lot.
I was curious about something like, what is that, how did it come, the first intuition of initiating the study? Like, a lot of surgeons didn't question, right, the state of art. So, how did you arrive to that? Like, how did it happen? And what was your first intuition of questioning the current state of art? And then you need to be faithful to this question for so long time, right? Before you know the results is 5 years, 6 years. So what is that to sustain you in this faithfulness to this question? Like every time I imagine you entering a surgical room questioning, am I doing the right thing for this patient? So I'm curious about that.
So to your first question, back in 2008, in our field came 2 defining studies. There were prospective randomized trials that explore the question of should we abandon open surgery for the minimally invasive approach in the most common type of women's cancer in the United States, which is uterine cancer. And those 2 studies had shown that there was equivalency, so that it was not something that was hurting patients, and that certainly might potentially serve a benefit to the patient. My concern was that perhaps uterine cancer is not the same and doesn't behave the same as cervical cancer. So my question was, this is a much more complex procedure also. When you're doing surgery for cervical cancer, it's a much more complex procedure than the surgery for uterine cancer. Even though they're hysterectomies, one of them is called a simple hysterectomy for uterine cancer, radical hysterectomy for cervical cancer. So that was my thought, that I said, before we implement this as a standard, I think we should test it and see, in fact, that it is actually the same. So of course, obviously, as I mentioned it to colleagues around the country, around the world, they were saying, why? I mean, what makes you think it's going to be different? Don't waste your time. This is going to be years of a prospective study, years of agony and effort and money. So therefore, you should not waste your time. And and throughout the 9 years, it was not uncommon that they would say, "Hey, how's that study going? Are you ever going to finish it?" And even obviously, even very respectable people, people that you really admired, and colleagues that I still have. I remember being in Rome at Gemelli in our Sacred Heart, and my colleagues saying, "Peter, why are you even pursuing this?" And those same colleagues, and they're great friends, but those same colleagues are like, "Why wasn't in that study? I would have been in the New England Journal of Medicine." but I mean, it was something that I persevered, and I said, well, I mean, we started it. There's a question, still unanswered, and let's pursue it.
I was wondering if you think there might be a prejudice in that, look, for the layman person, anytime you see a movie or something about the Civil War, the only way they could treat bullet wounds was if you have amputation. So, we don't do that anymore. And so now, because we have technology, that always progress means the use of technology, the use of doing things that are less invasive. Does that create a kind of mindset that prevents people from seeing what you discovered?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think that's a major contributing factor, because certainly not only for surgeons but also patients. Patients, they look at that robot and they say, whatever that does, that has to be better. And they look at all the lights and the fluorescence, and it's natural. I mean, you got to say, well, I mean, that looks fancy, it looks new, that's got to be great. And as one urologist was commenting in that conference that I was mentioning, he said, well, patients go by what we give the vital, because a patient will come to you and you're like, look, I'm the best robotic surgeon, and in fact there's somebody in Atlanta that their website says I'm the best robotic surgeon in the world. So talk about one over knowledge. But but certainly there's that component of just like it looks fancy, so it's got to be better. But I think again it goes back to the question of just we have a responsibility. We're taking care of patients. We have a tremendous privilege that you come into our office and you say, "Here I am. Take care of me." So I think that with that also comes the responsibility to make sure that what we're offering is the best thing for you, not the best thing for me. And a lot of surgeons to this conference that I went to, they said, well, and the thing is like with the robot, I'm going to be practicing at least 10 years longer. I don't have to retire, so therefore I'm going to be making more money for those 10 years. And I said to him, listen to yourself. I mean, you're basically saying it's okay to have high recurrences, it's okay to have higher mortality in your patients, but you're going to be working for 10 more years, And somebody else said, well, when I sit at the robot, I'm so comfortable. And it's like, oh, okay, so it's higher recurrence and mortality, okay, because you're more comfortable. So I think, and of course, I mean, it's cynical to have to address it this way, but I mean, it's a reality. And as you said, it's that perception of justice, it's just got to be better. And it's sad that sometimes you see it on social media, come to this great place, often sponsored by companies that make this products, and come and learn this, and this is the best way of it, and now I see it differently also, because in the past I was like, hey, look at that, that's a good course, it looks great. But now I also always question, whenever I see all of these enthusiastic registrants, I always question, it's like, are you really learning to do the right thing?
Actually, I just add something. I don't know if you know the story of Moneyball. What's fascinating is the sort of story. So this fellow, Billy Beane, who's the general manager of the Oakland A's, he introduced a number of like much more analytical approaches to where they wanted to find players basically who were better. And the issue was often they didn't look good. And the paradox of Billy Beane's own playing career was he kept playing for a long time despite the fact he was not as good a player as many less good looking but more effective players.
That's right.
Last question.
Thank you for the wonderful speech. I just have a question that relates to perhaps a broader context. Many of us are not surgeons, we don't deal with robots, but I was very interested in overall the talk, and at a certain point, Pedro, you said you have to stay true to yourself. And we live in time and age in which this staying true to yourself may not be entirely clear. And I wanted to ask the two of you, when you are talking to your kids, when you're talking to your students, when you are facing situations in life in which that truth may be shaken and yet there is something that is pointing somewhere to a different direction. What does it mean to stay really true to yourself? Is it an effort that I have to remind myself, must be true to yourself? Or there is something outside, elsewhere, that may be used as a guide? I think this experience is so powerful in the sense that I would like to learn for myself. What does it mean? What is this truth? And is there a way for me to find a direction?
I think it's an excellent question. I'll give the word to my friend Andrea. Let me turn on the mic for him also.
Thank you, Pedro.
He has broad and
No, I just understand in this way that the more I grow older, the more I understand that life is really made by how we really respond to reality moment by moment, and we try to respond in the best way that we can to try to build something that is bigger than what we are. And so this is how I can stay in front of my kids, saying sometimes I may make mistakes, sometimes I may, but this is ultimately where is the tension of my heart. And I understand this also when I am at work, when sometimes it's just that 1 minute that you spend more with that patient that needs that. If you don't do this, no one will know but you. And so it's really those, every moment, everything that we do, either we are responding to something bigger that is calling, or we are trying to create something for ourselves. And the more we look at life in this way, the more we hopefully try to be aware of that. Having friends is a way to help with this awareness. I have, for example, at work, I work with a nurse, whose name is Jess. I tell Jess, Jess, tell me, if you see that I'm not responding in the best way that I can because I'm tired, etc., let me know. And sometimes when I see a patient, she says, "Oh, Dr. Mariani, why don't we?" And I say, "Oh yes, thank you." So for me, that's a way to respond to a call to life in the best way that we can. And it's not just for us and how good we are, because it's really trying to respond to a call that is ultimately bigger than what we are. But if we follow that call, we are more happy. And so, but it's moment by moment. Please.
I mean, I agree completely, but I'm sure you're not expecting the answer to be just, I agree. No, I mean, I think that, for all of us in life, we want peace. And peace is one of the greatest things for the human spirit, the human heart. And how do we achieve that? We achieve that, I think, by surrounding ourselves with people who draw positive energy, people who are good to us, people who are great friends, people who are great family. And we want to see the smile on the face, and we want to see comfort, and that's how we draw peace. And one of the, I think, most important components of that peace is truth, that the honesty, just being able to go to sleep at night and say, I feel comfortable with how I conduct myself, how I walk through life, how I have looked at a question, answer that question was something that was unexpected, but I'm okay moving forward, facing the world and facing the profession, and rectifying those findings. And again, having that truth, that peace is, I think, is incredibly valuable as we move forward.
Just one thing, I think that the beauty of being with friends is that there is sometimes the possibility to be in peace, even when sometimes we realize that we are not up to what we desire. And but if we have a friend is the person that really help, that you can see also that perhaps I didn't do all that I could, but we can restart again tomorrow, and I can tell you that. So to me is the friend is really the person that help us to also to look with truth with ourselves, because sometimes there is a day that I'm not up to, I've not done everything that I could, and so is this the end? Probably not, because it's every day that happens, and so we just the friend is the one who reminds me of that, suggests that, tell me, okay, yes, you have not given all that you could with these patients, but let's restart the journey with the next one. So,
Thank you.
and I just conclude that, again, thank you for being here. For me, what is, it's interesting that it's like our heart desire to be in peace, to be in front of life and to be true with life. But the more there is a stake, the more something is important, the more there is this dizziness, the more we may not be able to stay in front of reality and true with reality and with ourselves in the way that we desire. This is why we have people with us on the journey that can help us to keep this gaze in front of life. And as you have demonstrated, Pedro, it's more convenient. It's more convenient to stay. Convenient is better for us to stay in front of reality in a true way. So thank you for being here with us.
We warmly thank Dr. Ramirez, Dr. Mariani, the University of St. Thomas, and all of you for sacrificing a Friday evening to listen to a wonderful discussion on being open to reality and how beautiful it is. If you are interested in Crossroads, please leave your business cards or register at the front desk, the information desk outside this room. We thank you for your support, and we also appreciate any donation for these beautiful events. A donation box is also available outside. Thank you so much. Reception is following. Thank you. Good night.